No, do you know about the dog? Donna does. Do you know about the dog? No, nobody knows about the dog. But there's definitely an injured dog somewhere. Do what now? We're good? Hey. All right. All right. Back into Jesus review this morning. Actually, going back to the New Testament. Third year of Jesus' ministry. We generally think Jesus' ministry was 3 years long. There's some debate about that, actually. Um, One of those things we've always kind of taken to be the way it is, but it kind of depends on. He goes through basically, if you look at it traditionally, he goes through 3 Passovers. So that's how come we get the idea of 3 years. But there is some scholarly debate about possibly one of them is not necessarily a Passover, that it might only. Some scholars they go anywhere from a year and a half to about 5 years, but most generally throughout history we've accepted 3 years, so we're not going to mess with that, and I don't think it's that important. But Jesus did things throughout his ministry, and his ministry, of course, peaked right before, almost before the crucifixion. It peaked when he went into Jerusalem and they were laying down the palm branches. And then, of course, he had a quick demise. So it was a building through time, the miracles, the people following him, the crowds. Some I don't know that he did bigger miracles at the end than he did at the beginning necessarily. All the miracles were pretty big. I don't think you can, put that. The raising of Lazarus, of course, is right at the end of Jesus' ministry, but I don't know necessarily that has significance as far as the size of the miracle or the manifestation of Christ. Um, he started his ministry. What was really the start of Jesus' ministry? When did it really start? Water into wine, first miracle, right? I mean, and then but really and that was the first. And Jesus at that time told his mother. He said, "What did he say?" He says, "My time's not yet come." Right? It's not time. And there's a lot of debate about what he meant by that. But the truth is Jesus really was an obscure figure in history, right? There was no significance to him at all until what happened. What was the turning point in that? Baptism of John, right? He was baptized by John in the Jordan, and at that time, that's when he started to gather disciples to himself. He healed Peter's mother-in-law, right? He started to come in, and that's kind of interesting because that was probably really the first miracle, I think, wasn't it? I mean, really, chronologically, if you really look at that, was Peter's mother-in-law, right? Was probably the first miracle because he healed her. That's what really made a lot of the disciples start to look at him. The catch of fish, right? That was a miracle early on, before water into wine, right? I think before Capernaum. So, I don't know the deal with when Jesus said it's not my time or whatever. If he meant he really wasn't a miracle that God would have had him perform, or if he meant it really was something he didn't want to bring himself into the limelight. The miracles thrust him into the light of the world. No doubt about it. When he started doing miracles, people started coming to him in droves. And, we can see that happening. So that was really the start of something big. And then, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of controversy. How did she know that? We don't know, right? Do what he tells you to do, right? She told him. And, the other thing was odd about that story is, she was a woman stepping up, making that recommendation. She was commanding them, like she had some authority to tell them what to do, there's a lot of talk about that. What was her role in that? Why did she step up and do that? Why was it important to her? You know, who's, so I don't know. It must have been a big wedding, right? Jesus was there, disciples were there, Mary was there. Obviously, she knew he had some power to do that. Yeah. Well, I don't think chronologically it really was. I have to go back and really look at that. But the catch of fish, with that chronologically, I don't know. I'm trying to look at Gary here, but he's not making eye contact. Water into wine. That was before the fish, before Peter. Maybe so. Yeah, probably was the first one then. Yeah, I'm just trying in my head to kind of go back and play that out. You know. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how she knew. He had to have done something that she would have known he had the ability to do that. So, I don't know. Chronological sequences in the Gospels are very tricky. I'm just here to tell you. Uh, Gospel writers are not real chronological. They tend to put things where it helps their text, helps their message more than it necessarily. They weren't as worried about getting things in a chronological sequence as they were about the overall message and trying to expound that message by what was going on. So, we see things in different places in different gospels. And so you kind of got to plug it all together. And even when you do that, you still kind of have trouble sometimes. And John is the worst, John is just, he is a chronologically challenged guy. I mean, he just literally jumps all over the place. So, I think when you start looking about this is the first year, this is the second year, this is the third year, there's a lot of muddle in there because it's just, you got miracles repeated in different gospels at different places in different gospels. Even the Sermon on the Mount, you get it at a different place in Luke than you do in Matthew. There's things excluded, things included. So there's just a lot of, we don't know a lot of that. When you look back at the gospels, you're not looking at a diary. And so many times that's how we look at the gospels. We look at them like, you know, well, I mean, technically, right? They're written way after the fact. But we still look at them almost like somebody's writing down daily what Jesus was doing, like you're reading my diary. But the truth is, the Gospels aren't like that at all. The Gospels are going back. They're a narrative of the history, the life, the miracles of Jesus, but they're based around an argument to a certain crowd, and they're based around this idea of this whole narrative. And because of that, it's not so important necessarily where they put the miracle chronologically. It's how the miracle fits into the text of the gospel. So, we see that. There's a lot of variation. Yeah. Yeah, Gary says the first of the, and what was that? What, what scripture did you say? John 2 and 11. He said it was the first of his miracles. So, to show that. So, like I say, chronologically, when we say, well, the first year, the third year, I'm going to give you some dates, some miracles, but it's like I said, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. I can't necessarily tell you that's exactly the sequence of events. There's a lot of debate about it, even among scholars. There's a lot of debate about it, but John 2, 1 through 11, what Gary just said, turning the water into wine. Teaching in the synagogues in Galilee, Luke 4. See, you jump around a lot, when you look at Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're supposed to be synoptically the same. In other words, they all look from the same point of view, but, they're still earlier and later gospels, even in that, ones are written first, the gospels written second. So they kind of played on each other a little bit, or scholars think they did. And there's even a little debate that there's like this X-gospel out there that we don't have, that nobody has, that was kind of like the main thing they all kind of looked at, but there's no real proof of that. But, Jesus began teaching in the synagogues in Galilee in Luke chapter 4. Jesus goes to Jerusalem for the Passover, John 2:13. Now that would be the first Passover. So that's kind of how that's what most people consider the beginning of that first year, was that first Passover. Go from the first Passover and then to the last Passover. So about a 3-year period of time in there before he was crucified. So that depends on when he was baptized by John, because, by John the Baptist in the Jordan, because in John 2:13, that's at 27 AD. Most people think that's a 27 AD Passover. He was crucified in 30. So if he started his ministry, the baptism before that, then he went for the first Passover, then there was the second Passover, then he was crucified at the third Passover. So that's kind of how that's generally viewed. Jesus cleansed the temple for the first time. And that's another thing, right? John begins the ministry of Jesus with the cleansing of the temple, John 2:14 through 17. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all end Jesus' ministry, with the cleansing of the temple. So synoptically, that was the end of his ministry, and John is the beginning of his ministry. In John, he made a scourge of cords, and the others, he didn't do that. So, um, was there two cleansing of the temples? Most scholars think there was, one at the beginning, one at the end. So most of them think he actually did that twice. But then there's some debate about that. Was it actually, two different times? Or was John just being how John is? Was John just putting it at the beginning? Because John likes to do these things. So if you look at it from a biblical standpoint, it was cleansed twice. Once at the beginning, once at the end of his ministry. So, why wasn't it mentioned? That's the other thing you have to look at. There's a lot of things mentioned. The raising of Lazarus to me, that was one of Jesus' biggest miracles of all time, was the raising of Lazarus. I mean, Lazarus was dead 3 days in the tomb, delayed coming back, but yet we only had that in John, right? So it's interesting, sometimes you question that. Why don't we have it over here? Why do we have that here? Why do we have this one miracle 3 times or 4 times, and we have this one just one time? Well, like I said, it was what was playing into the narrative of the story. John was building up to the crucifixion, and that's how he did that, with that and the cleansing of the temple. And where John, he starts this 2:14 through 17. That's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. That's where it really comes onto the stage. Nicodemus, John 3, 1 through 21. Nicodemus comes to Jesus at night. That's Nicodemus is curious about Christ, right? He's the teacher, comes to Jesus, wants to know about salvation. Jesus says you have to be born of the water and the Spirit, or you can't be saved. He was the beginning of people noticing. John brings that up because people were noticing him. Even the Jews were noticing him. It was a thing. Who is this guy? What's he teaching? What's he doing? Nicodemus was scared to go to him in the day, right? Which kind of tells you that already there was a little stigma to Jesus. He didn't want to be seen doing it. But yet Nicodemus was curious. Nicodemus goes to Jesus at night, asking him these questions. And that's a good story within itself, John chapter 3. John the Baptist tells the disciples Jesus is more important, John 3, 27 through 36. So that's the beginning of the demise of John, his going, Jesus increasing, John decreasing, John getting thrown into prison, John getting beheaded, which won't happen for just a little while yet. Women at the well, John 4. Samaritan woman at the well. John 3 is Nicodemus. John 4 is woman at the well. Coming back through Samaria, Jesus stops a woman at the well, Samaritan woman at the well, asks her of her husband. You don't have a husband, but you've had 3. People will worship. This great conversation Jesus had, right? Where she says, our fathers tell us to worship on this mountain. You Jews say to worship in Jerusalem. And Jesus says, you worship what you do not know. We worship what you do know, but there's a time coming we'll worship in spirit and truth. So there's the big discussion. What the great stories, right? John gives us these great, in the beginning, I think, John, in John 2, John 3 and John 4, 2 of the greatest, I think, narratives of Jesus in the Bible, Nicodemus and the woman at the well. So very powerful stuff. The beginning of Jesus' ministry, people questioning him, the Samaritans questioning him, the Jews questioning him. John brings that together. Who are you? John proposes Jesus is the Son of God, proposes the deity of Christ. John starts with that. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. John pushes that throughout his gospel because he's fighting Gnostics, and his gospel's from a different perspective. Really light perspective. John's a really light gospel. So, what else is interesting about John? Does anybody can think of anything else that's really fascinating about that? John's gospel is way different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Basically, there's no parables in John, right? John just kind of gets away from that. So there's a lot of things. John's different, more focused. John spends a lot of time at the end of Jesus' life, a lot of time. From John 14, actually John 13, all the way to the end of John's gospel is all the last few hours of the life of Christ. His meeting with the disciples, the high priestly prayer, John 17, all the last few hours, the Passover, the meal, the portrayal of Judas. John spends a lot of his gospel, half of his gospel, on that last few hours. So John really concentrates on that part of Jesus' ministry more than he does like the others early on. You don't get much of the early on in John. So, you kind of got to put that into perspective. Jesus announces he's the Messiah, John 4, 5 through 38, right? Woman at the well announces who he is, intent for himself the first time. He doesn't really describe himself a whole lot, does he? Or Jesus doesn't. They ask him, "Who are you? Who do you say that I am?" Right? He doesn't really say that much, just a few times. And most of the time, interestingly, most of the time that happens, it's in John's gospel, right? It's in John when he's before Pilate that he says, you say that I am, right? Are you a king? Yes, I am a king. For this reason I was born. It's interesting. John pushes that more than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So, moving on through that, King Herod puts John the Baptist in prison, Matthew 14. Jesus heals a nobleman's son, John 4, 46 through 54. The beginning of his ministry finally goes back to Nazareth, little town of Nazareth, right? He's rejected in Nazareth by those people that know him. Isn't this the carpenter or the carpenter's son, depending on how you take that text? Can go either way, actually, in the Greek. So isn't this the carpenter or the carpenter's son? That, we know this guy, right? Isn't this little snotty-nosed kid that was raised up here? How can he be the Christ? That doesn't make any sense. And they rejected him. And Jesus says a prophet's not without honor save in his own country. I always thought that was a really fascinating statement when he's in Nazareth, because he knows that he'll be rejected there. And then another thing he did there, right, it says he didn't perform any miracles there because of their unbelief, right, or lack of faith. And that's always a big thing. Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he just perform the miracles and prove that he was who he said he was? Why did he just not do it? And that's, I think I would have went the opposite way if I would have been Jesus, and they would have said, this is this kid, we know him. And I think I would have done more miracles there to say, look at who I am. But Jesus was the opposite. He didn't do it because they didn't believe. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Why do you think he did that? That's kind of interesting. Why didn't he prove them wrong? Yeah, that's interesting, right? Jesus understood something, I think, that you see in the Bible, that miracles never really converted anyone to him. Miracles were never really the converting factor. It was they just didn't happen. I mean, he did a lot of miracles, and most of the people that the miracles were performed on, or most of the people that happened, they didn't really stick with him. They were there for the miracle. He alluded to that in John 6, right? When he says, "You came to me not for the signs, but because you ate the loaves and were filled." He understands that type of thing wasn't going to make long-term disciples. Why is that? Why do you think that is? It. Right. Yeah, to be raised up by him every day, see him every day, and then not to make that connection. Like Sherry said, he lived a perfect life. The Bible says he lived a perfect life. So, but yet they still didn't see that in him because they were so close. And people who look for miracles, as Jesus says in the Gospels, right? He says you want them. They would say, "Show us the Father. It's enough for us." He showed them all these miracles. They're like, "Show us another one." People that have miracles, it became about the show. It became about the miracle. Have another miracle, a bigger miracle. What are you going to do now, right? What's next? And yet Jesus understood, and really you can go into that scripturally and look at it over and over. The Word and the Scripture is what really converted people long term to Christ. It was never the miracle. That was to confirm his deity, confirm he was the Son of God, or to confirm the Word as the apostles used it. But oftentimes the miracles became a show. When the show was over, the people left. Yeah, that's right. There were other miracles going on, and we know that, and people perceived it that way. Simon the sorcerer worked many signs and wonders among the people, it said. So, but, so there were others. There were charlatans. There was illusion. There was other things going on. People were easily taken in by that, probably at that period in history. People are pretty easily taken in by that today, right? So the truth is that was going on. He's just another guy. He's just another one of them guys. I mean, some of his miracles were obviously way bigger and more powerful than any of theirs were, but at the end of the day, the miracles themselves didn't latch people on to Jesus. It just didn't happen. That just wasn't what attached them to him in the long term. Short term, yeah, they flogged him, they followed him, they brought their sick, they did all these things, but in the long term, the miracles never really didn't attach them to him. It wasn't a long-term commitment. The miracles were people wanting something done. You got to understand, when people came to Jesus for a miracle, they weren't coming to Jesus to really get what Jesus had to offer. They were coming because they wanted something done for them. They wanted a piece of him, right? And when they got what they wanted, as often happens in life, as you know, right? When people get what they want, all of a sudden they don't have a lot of use anymore for you, right? They got what they desired. I always wonder about the life of Jesus when I read, is that all those people, he did all those miracles, all these wonderful things, fed these multitudes, and he healed the sick, and he raised the dead, and people got their sight back. How tremendous of a miracle is that? And yet, where were those people when they took Jesus to the cross? Right? They were in the crowd saying, crucify him, crucify him. A lot of them were. Maybe not all of them, but I guarantee you a lot of those people that ate those loaves and were filled were probably in that crowd saying, crucify him, crucify him. And they watched him carry that cross up Calvary's mountain. So I think those people, did they have, maybe some of them did, I'm sure. I mean, I'm not categorizing them all together by any means, but a lot of those people that had miracles, because Jesus did a lot of miracles. A lot of miracles. We only have a few. Bible says that. We only have a little. He did a lot more than people came to him by the multitudes, right? And he healed, Scripture says he healed all who came at one point. So he healed a lot of people. He did a lot of miracles. And, where were all those people? Where did they stand up and defend him? Did they stand up and take his side? The Bible says pretty much everybody turned against him, but just a very select few. So miracles didn't do it in the long term. And I think Jesus knew that at Nazareth, and that's how come he said, no, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to waste my energy on you because obviously you have no concept of who I am. Right. Yeah, they were definitely looking for an earthly king, and they were looking for him to step up and fill that role. And when he didn't do that, it was confusing to them. And I think you see that in Matthew when Jesus asks his disciples, who do people say that I am? And they said, well, Elijah, one of the prophets. They didn't conceive he was the Messiah or the Son of God. And then he says, who do you say that I am? And that's where you get Peter's great confession. But yeah, absolutely. He wasn't what they were looking for, and they were confused by that. Who is this guy that comes to do miracles and he doesn't rise up and be a king? What is this guy? Who is this guy? So, yeah, there's a lot of a lot of stuff going on, and Jews were struggling with it too. I'm sure there were a lot of very studious Jews that were looking at the Old Testament and like, is this the guy? Is this the guy? How do we prove he's the guy? How do we prove he's not the guy? And then they would come to him, are you the guy? And Jesus will say, well, what do you think? And they're like, well, that's what we're trying to figure out. All right, throw us a bone here. All right, that's what we're trying to figure out, if you're the guy, So I think there's a lot of stuff goes on. And they were looking for Elijah to come, right? And that was one of the Old Testament prophecies, there'll be Elijah. Elijah will come before the Lord. And, of course, Jesus said, well, John the Baptist was the Elijah who is to come. But, they were looking for that. So they even were looking, well, is John or is Jesus, is Jesus Elijah? Who do they say that I am? Well, some say you're one of the prophets, right? A reincarnation of one of the prophets, because that should happen before the Messiah comes. That's why Jesus asked that question. But if they think you're one of the prophets, then they don't think you're the Messiah. They just think you're the one coming before that. We're still waiting for the Messiah to come. And Jews are still waiting for the Messiah to come, right? They're still waiting for the Messiah to come. So, yeah, pretty confusing for them, for sure. It would have been hard being a Jew at the time of Jesus. We're quick to criticize them. We really are. We're quick to jump on there and say, man, they should have saw it. They should have saw it was Jesus. But it would have been hard to be a Jew when Jesus was on the face of the earth. That would have been tough. In a lot of ways, that would have really been tough. I've often thought, boy, if I was a devout Pharisee at the time of Jesus, would I have accepted or rejected Jesus? And, my honest answer is, I probably would have rejected him. And, and I guess you can ask yourself that question, but you really got to get yourself back in that Jewish mindset of what they'd been raised up for, what they were expecting, what they were looking for. Was Jesus fitting the mold? Well, you and I have the great advantage. We can go back and read the Gospels and read how all that fits together and all that Old Testament prophecy fits together and how Jesus did all that stuff. They didn't have any of that, right? They didn't have any of that. They weren't able to go back and read it like you and I and look at the whole story and look at the whole story of Jesus. They were trying to figure it out as it was happening. And it would have been very confusing as it was happening, I think. So, I don't know, any comments about that? You had a lot of disciples, a lot of rabbis, a lot of Jewish leaders that were rejecting it. And we criticized them really, really quick. But Jesus was basically tearing down their religion. He was tearing, he says he wasn't. He says, I didn't come to abolish, right? I came to fulfill it. But the very fulfillment of the prophecy, the very fulfillment of that was the end of Judaism as they knew it, right? No more sacrifice, no more temple. No more any of that you need anymore, right? No more priestly line. That's a lot to take in. That's a lot to take in, I think. Jesus cast out demons. Are Jesus rejected? Yeah. Jesus cast out demons in Capernaum, Mark and Luke. Something you don't really see in John, casting out demons, something John is so late. I think a lot of that's gone away by the time John writes, which that's another whole lesson within itself. That's something I've really been studying lately on my own, that I've really been studying a lot is looking at this later text like John, and then looking at some ancient church fathers text like Irenaeus and Polycarp, some of those guys, and trying to piece that together on miracles and demons, trying to prove that a lot of that really disappeared right after Jesus was crucified. There's some pretty strong historical evidence for that a lot of that went away shortly after Jesus was crucified. You see it directly after he was crucified. You see it in Acts when they were the 7 sons of Sceva were casting out the demons, and the demons said, Jesus we know, right? We don't, Jesus we know, Paul we know, but we don't know you, right? Or Peter we know, Jesus we know, we don't know you. But demons really went away after that, and miracles really went away after that. And if you look at Corinthians, you look at John's writings, then you start to get into early church fathers' writings. John, who was banished to Patmos, right? And then when John was banished out of Patmos by Nero, which most people think it was Nero, some people don't, but most people do. So he's banished by Nero to Patmos, and then he was released from Patmos, and then John goes to Ephesus. And John's an old guy now, right? John's a pretty old guy. So John winds up going to Ephesus, which is where he wrote one of the letters to the churches of Asia. And when John goes to Ephesus, then he takes this guy under his wing as a student, and his name's Polycarp. And so, and there's some tradition, church tradition, that you can't prove, that says this Polycarp that John took under his wings as a student was one of the children that they said went to Jesus, and Jesus said, "Forbid not the children to come to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." No historical proof to that, but there's some church tradition that says Polycarp is one of those children that actually sat on the knee of Jesus, and then John takes him under his wing and teaches him. So, and we have his writings, so we can kind of look at what was going on, like in the church, right after the apostolistic age, right after John died. John's old, right? John's in Ephesus, and John's so weak. And I think this is kind of interesting. John's like 100, like close to probably 80, 90 years old. John's old. And so John is actually being carried to church on this leader by these guys. They're actually carrying him to go to worship in Ephesus. You know, John's that age that they're actually carrying him to go to worship, and yet John's teaching. You know, John's the last apostle. John's the last guy. So everybody else gets killed so early that we don't get a lot from them because they're all getting martyred early on. And yet John, because he got banished to Patmos, because he wound up in Ephesus, John's doing this teaching to these other people, and we can look at their writings as John's student, and that's kind of interesting. And we don't spend a lot of time on that church-wise, but it's kind of interesting to look at those early guys, right? You know, and to see their take on Christ and their take on the Gospels and their take on this before they actually had the whole New Testament we have laid out in front of them, their take, right? So I've been doing that quite a bit, and it's really been interesting to me because that's why I've been doing this, because of these demons, because of the miracles. You know, when did that stop? Did it stop? Did it keep going on? Do we have early historical record of demon possession in the 2nd century, you know, late 1st century? Pretty good study. So interesting. But here we get into that. Jesus heals the leper. You know, Jesus healed several lepers, right? Heals the centurion's servant, Matthew 8. The widow's son raised from the dead. That's one of my favorite miracles in the whole Bible. I don't ever spend much time on that. That's one of my favorite miracles, is the widow's son. I think, you know, if you remember that story or not, but the widow was coming out of town, and Jesus just happened to be coming in, right? And she was a widow, and it was her only son, the text says. Widow and her only son, which in that time was huge. And the funeral procession, you know, he's laid out, and they're going out of the city. Jesus is coming in. And the reason I like that miracle is because they didn't come to Jesus, right? They didn't come and say, "Oh, here's Jesus, he can heal him. You know, here's Jesus, he can raise him from the dead. You know, let's go get Jesus," right? It was one of them cases that you see sometimes in the Bible where Jesus just looked and said, "I can really fix that." And I just think that's a Jesus moment. You know, I just think if I was Jesus, that would be the best. Right? When they weren't really coming to you, they weren't really looking for anything, they weren't really expecting anything, and Jesus looks over and sees this woman lamenting and wailing, and it's her only son, and she's a widow, and that's just such a powerful thought to me anyway. And she's just bereaved, and Jesus looks over there, and he had this compassion, and he goes and he says, "I can fix that." I just think that's just an amazing. I just think that had to be amazing. And then to go over and the guy just steps up on the. Can you imagine that scene? I mean, I've been to I don't know how many funerals, way too many, right? I mean, one funeral's way too many. I've been to way too many funerals. And can you imagine being at a funeral and somebody being in the casket and everybody weeping in the morning, and all of a sudden they just get up, get out of the casket? You know, well, that's what happened, and that was that miracle. You know, and that was just, to me, that would have just been. I can't imagine the joy of that occasion. It's just hard for me to wrap my mind around the joy. Jesus bringing that tears to joy. Anyway, what a great miracle. Y'all can jump in anytime here. But I love that miracle. One of my favorites, for sure. The paralytic on the Sabbath, right? Started doing these Sabbath healings. Boy, that was a big point of contention. That's what started really irritating the Jews. Of course, the Jews were a little irritated anyway, but that didn't help. Wanted to kill him, claiming God the Father, John 5:17 through 18. You got to get to John to get to those scriptures. John's the one who always portrays Jesus as the Son of God. John, that's a big John theme. So, that was the start of that. Herod Antipas orders the death of John the Baptist. Jesus goes to Sea of Galilee as the Passover approaches. That's the 29 AD Passover. So that's where we're getting into this last part of Jesus' life. So we've run through these Passovers. That's how we kind of date the time of Jesus. We're supposed to be looking, starting Wednesday night, start looking at the third year of Jesus' ministry, which was probably his most popular year until, the tide really turned against him. But it was also the start of the year that really the Jews, I think, became much more critical of Jesus. Not so much questioning, like, who are you, what are you? But they started to become real critical. We want to kill you. We want to do away with you. You can't be the Son of God. You're not this guy. You're an imposter. The Jews became to be much more critical, and yet the populace became much more supportive, much more engaged with Jesus. The crowds that followed him, the people around him became tremendous and huge. So a lot of stuff going on here. So anyway, I hope that kind of gets us up to speed on where we're going this morning. I hope you find that interesting. Read the Gospels. Get a chronological Bible. If you really want to know how that goes, that's probably the best way. You can buy chronological Bibles, and you can buy a Bible that, and I've got one of those too, and I can't tell you the name of it now, but you can buy a Bible that has all the Gospels columned and everything in chronological order. So you can. I've done that before on the screen. So you can do that, and that kind of helps you go through it with a little more chronological accuracy, and kind of helps you put all the Gospels together, where they overlap, where they're talking about a different miracle or the same miracle or a different person, the same person. You can buy those. They're 4 columns, all the Gospels, chronological. So you can buy those that are pretty handy if you really want to kind of get a scope for how that all plays out. So anyway, are there any comments? Well, thanks for your time this morning. We'll see you in a minute.